When I was little, the story of Plymouth and the Pilgrims on the Mayflower was billed as basically the first thing that happened in America. The first settlement, the first new people to come over. Well, it wasn't. There was Jamestown, there was Roanoke, there was St. Augustine, etc. So why do we care about Plymouth? Plenty of reasons. It's a story of Thanksgiving, it's a story of Europeans interacting with Native Americans without murder and stealing, albeit for a very short period in time. It's a story of religious freedom and the beginning of America's brand as the shining city on a hill. Or whatever America's brand happens to be at the time you're watching this. It's one of America's PR pieces and a nice old yearbook photo that we can look back on and not cringe too much. The story of the Pilgrims begins in 1608 in the English village of Scrooby? Scrooby-Dooby-Doo, where are you? Oh, there you are. A local Christian congregation fed up with the mandatory national religion of the Church of England decided to flee the country in search of the freedom to worship as they wished. Quick aside about the Church of England. The origins of the Church of England stem directly from King Henry VIII's desire to produce a male heir to the throne. After having 6 daughters with Catherine of Aragon, he sought to annul his marriage so he could remarry someone who might birth something with a Y chromosome. After his efforts were stonewalled by both his wife and the Pope, Henry VIII said, "Hey, you know what would be cool? A church that lets me divorce my wife whenever I want." So he made that church himself, called it the Church of England, and that is a big part of the English Reformation and the country's crawl toward becoming a Protestant state, which is interesting and important, but not what this video is about. So back to the Pilgrims. They were disenchanted with both Catholicism and its new cheap knockoff, viewing them both as corrupt in every sense of the word, so they left to start a new life in Holland. No one told them how to worship in Holland, but now they found that as migrants, they were relegated to the bottom rung of society and only able to secure jobs doing simple labor for little pay. Because when everyone in your country already has the same color skin, you have to find some other way to designate an underclass. A funny accent will suffice. Dutch society also offered a cornucopia of worldly distractions such as brothels and rock music. The Pilgrim separatist leader, William Bradford, saw this as a big problem and decided that they needed to go somewhere else, somewhere far, far away where there wasn't anything but trees and the cruel forces of nature. The New World. Pilgrims, who actually referred to themselves as saints and not pilgrims, headed back to England to prepare for a voyage to North America. In 1620, about 40 pilgrims along with other colonists piled onto 2 boats, the Mayflower and the Speedwell, and set sail across the Atlantic. Right about now, you're probably going, the Speed who? And that's because the Speedwell unfortunately awakened a slumbering old one and was subsequently sunk, never making it to the New World, and therefore relegated to a mere footnote in history. No, the Speedwell had leaks, and they had to go back to Plymouth Harbor and crowded together onto the Mayflower. This set everyone back, and they had to instead sail during the stormiest part of the year, making the journey a tad more harrowing than they had wanted. After reaching the New World, the Mayflower landed in the wrong place because of course it did. If you just looked at every majorly consequential nautical voyage from before the 18th century, you'd think nobody ever got where they were trying to go. The Pilgrims were supposed to land and establish their colony in the territory of Virginia in accordance with their deal with the Virginia Company. They landed well north of there on the tip of what we know today as Cape Cod, Massachusetts, which back then was ungoverned wilderness. And when I say ungoverned, I really just mean there were no other Europeans there. Now, the Mayflower voyage was financed by investors who believed they were purchasing a stake in whatever goods and resources were to come out of the proposed Plymouth colony. Upon realizing they weren't in Virginia Company territory, the non-Pilgrim populace of the ship began arguing, "Hey, there's no government here. We don't have to honor those contracts, and we can do whatever we want." And then William Bradford was like, okay, let's settle down. We can't do whatever we want. I didn't travel halfway around the world to create another run-of-the-mill den of sin. If I wanted that, I would have stayed in Holland. Let's just make our own government. The rest of the voyagers sadly put away their axes and garishly festooned purge masks and said, fine. The resulting document, which they hammered out, became known as the Mayflower Compact. Though they did swear allegiance to the Crown of England, they also engineered a government run and represented by elected officials. It was one of the earliest examples of colonial American democracy and became a forerunner to the outdated and dysfunctional system we're trapped in today. Should I talk about this stupid rock? Might as well, I guess. In the deep recesses of your brain, you might have the haziest of grade school recollections about something called Plymouth Rock. Some big rock that the Pilgrims stepped on as they got off the Mayflower or something. Well, not really. First of all, it's not that big. Second, there is no first-hand documentation of the Plymouth Rock event. The only reason we have this legend at all is because Thomas Faunce, an old man who was the son of one of the Mayflower passengers, claimed he'd been told that that rock, that extremely ordinary rock, was the rock. In my non-historian opinion, as disappointing as it sounds, I think chances are better than not that this is just some random rock that is of no genuine historical significance. There are just too many variables here. This claim was over 100 years after the landing. The guy who hadn't been born yet could have been senile and confused. He could have easily misremembered which rock or where it was. He could just be telling a tale for fun. He could have misheard, or the people who told him may have also been wrong for any number of reasons, including that the Mayflower actually left the Plymouth Rock site just days later, sailing closer to the mainland to start their colony, so they didn't even stick around the area. Who is really going to remember that rock? It's not impossible that that's the rock, but the claim is dubious at best. But anyway, the Pilgrims. Most of the colonists stayed on the ship while taking boats back and forth to shore to construct a new settlement. Most of the colonists also died off in their first winter in America from disease, exposure, and starvation. In fact, it's likely all of them would have died if it weren't for the local Native Americans. As luck would have it, they made contact with a local English-speaking Abenaki man named Samoset, who was able to get them help from Chief Massasoit and the local Wampanoag tribe. The colonists learned hunting and agriculture from them and were able to not only survive, but become self-sufficient. And as I'm sure you already know, this triumph over the elements culminated in a feast of Thanksgiving. Removed from overall historical context, in this particular place, in this particular snapshot in time, things were okay, I guess. The town of Plymouth survived and eventually became part of the Massachusetts Bay Colony and the state of Massachusetts. And that's the story of how the Pilgrims journeyed to America on illicit funding they'd appropriated by scamming investors. I'm entering the eighth I am, entering the eighth I am, I got married to the widow next door. She's been married 7 times before, and everyone was an entering. She wouldn't have a Willie or a Sam. No,